Hello and welcome to Day 5 at Tata Literature Live. The 11th annual Mumbai International Litfest is now completely digital. The event has been co-sponsored by Tata Steel and Tata Projects. This particular session has been sponsored by Blank Slate Knowledge Foundation. There will be a 15-minute Q&A at the end of the session, so please do send in your questions as and when you think of them in the comment section of the platform that you are viewing from. Imprisoned by one's own nation, just because of how you look, a story we prefer to forget, or a truth that needs to be discussed. During the 1962 war with China, the Indian government incarcerated Indians of Chinese heritage at the Deoli camp in the state of Rajasthan. Today we take a look at this forgotten piece of our history with a discussion of the book Deoliwallahs, the story of the 1962 Chinese Indian internment. The Deoliwallahs was co-authored by Joy Ma and Dilip D'Souza. Joy Ma is one of the few children who was born in Deoli internment camp in Rajasthan. She grew up in India and graduated from New School for Social Research in the US. Dilip D'Souza was a computer scientist before he became an award-winning writer and journalist. He writes mainly about social and political causes. A warm welcome to our speakers.
Hi everyone, my name is Dilip D'Souza. Thank you, Gillian, for introducing us. Thank you to Tata Lit Live for having us. We think this is an important book, an important issue, and we're so glad that we're able to discuss it with all of you today. My co-author Joy is on screen with us, as you can see. Just a little bit about, Gillian mentioned that I'm a lapsed computer scientist. That's true. I now write for a living. I do a mathematics column for Mint, among other things, and this Deoli issue when it came to mind a few years ago, I was just totally fascinated, but totally also shocked that I didn't know anything about it. So it was something up my street as a journalist. I really wanted to write about it, and the book really, again, as Gillian said, Deoliwallahs is really about a totally forgotten episode in our history when we incarcerated almost 3,000 Chinese Indians in this prison camp in Deoli for up to 5 years. And this was, of course, a fallout of the 1962 war with China, but ironically, the incarceration actually started after the war was over. I hope to get to why that was later, or you can read it in the book, of course. Joy, as you heard, was born in the camp in 1963, and she spent the first 4 years of her life there. And I think that gives her a unique perspective on this issue. So Joy, tell us a little bit about yourself and about your connection to this story.
Thank you, Dilip. What I wanted to bring to the viewer's attention is Dilip saying that he had never heard about this story, whereas from my perspective, that's all I lived with, and I still live with it today. My family and the people that we know from the community, it's an event that can never be forgotten, and so a lot of writing the book was about getting the story to people's awareness, and then to help them, understand more about it. So I grew up in Calcutta after coming out, being released from Deoli with my family. I grew up speaking Bengali as a little girl, along with Cantonese and Mandarin and a bit of Nepali. And then when I went to school, that's when I studied English, and then English became my language of communication. I studied, after Calcutta, I went to New Delhi, and I went to Lady Shri Ram College. And then following that, I came to the States, and I have been working and living here since the 80s. And I'm currently a writer. In these days, they call it content marketer. So I'm a content marketer for a tech company. How's that go?
Yeah, and you were going to take this forward by first showing some pictures to our viewers of.
Right.
Okay. So why don't we do that? Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to introduce a visual of what the camp looked like, and so we're going to show some photographs. So crew, if you could line that up, that would be great. Next slide, please. So I wanted to just show you the book. You guys know about it. That's a picture of my parents and my brothers. And this was in the October before they were arrested. So they were taken on the 25th of January, and this was taken the October before that. Next slide, please. So this is the camp which had been created, which had been built a long time ago, before we were interned. It was built probably in the 1930s or the 1940s, and
even earlier. It dates back to the 19th century, actually. Yeah. But carry on, yeah.
So it was built by the British government, and a lot of different POWs were incarcerated there, along with some freedom fighters, including Jawaharlal Nehru. This is what people remember a lot of it. Very dry, very military, and very, very desolate. Next slide, please. So there were some people, so this photo was taken by my relative, Steve Chu, when he went in the early 2010s. And he took a photo of the cemetery because a couple of people had passed away and their remains were still in the camp. Next slide, please. My family stayed in Deoli for a long time, and it became almost routine that sometimes the authorities would take us out on trips. And so at this time they took my parents and all of us in a lorry to Jaipur, and my parents took us to a studio and we took a photo. That's my brother, Lyndon, and then my younger brother, William, and then I was around 4 years old. And that's the end of our photos. I just wanted to give you guys a visual of what we were talking about.
You were a small baby, Joy, in that photo.
Indeed.
So I'd like to start, Joy. I'm going to just throw a couple of questions at you. But first of all, this is really your story, Joy. You know, in a very real sense, because you were born there and you spent those first 4 years there. And so it's your story and the story of a few thousand more like you. So why did you choose to write it with someone else? I mean, I'm not trying to say that I'm ungrateful that you chose me, but why did you choose to write it with someone else?
I think because it was such a personal story for me, I always envisioned it to be my story, just all about me. But around it was 2012. It was the 50th anniversary of the incarceration, and I began to meet more people who were from the community. I was very small, so I was very, not isolated, but I didn't know these folks. And you know, like 50 years later, it was time. And it's not also a topic that you really want to talk about all the time. You know, it's very, it's depressing often. And so when I met all the other people who were willing to talk about it, so I need to tell you guys, in the community, I know a lot of people, but a lot of people I know don't want to talk about it. And so I met a different bunch of people who were willing to talk about it. They were activists. They had created an organization, and it struck me that it's really the story of a community. But the other barrier I felt was nobody knew about this, and it was really, really difficult to convince people, even though there was a parallel, like the Japanese internment. So I really was looking for someone who had no experience, had no knowledge of it, and how their journey has been, because all the people I'm going to be writing the story for would be like that person who didn't know about it until 2012. And I met Dilip, I met you at in 2015, where you came and watched the documentary with us and traveled with us and got to know people. And I just thought you were a marvelous writer, and I wanted you to be able to help me tell that story. That's not so personal.
But no, one of the reasons I wanted to ask that question is because it seems to me, and from what I've heard from you, it must have been hard for you to open up and to tell your story to others. And I know that you managed to do it now, but how hard was that? Like you mentioned, there were others who still don't want to tell your story. So how hard was it for you to open up and tell that story, and then to to work with somebody else to actually flesh it out into a book? I mean, was that a hard process for you?
The book itself, writing the book with you, was not a hard process because I think I had made the decision to write and tell the story before that. I think it came along the proposal time. But you're right. What you're getting at is how closed this story is to of circles. So it's your family, it's a little bigger circle, it's a little bit bigger circle because for me, having been born in Deoli, people would see me and say, oh, here's this kid was born there. And they would look at me with a lot of all sorts of emotions. And it wasn't always very pleasant for me. And so what you bring up is the fact that we don't always talk about it to outsiders, right? So you wouldn't go to a dinner party with your friends and say, hey, by the way, this is my story. So it was actually very difficult to speak about it because nobody knew about it. But you're right, it was very, very difficult up until the 50th anniversary where I met a friend, Kai Fries, who asked me to write if I knew anybody who had been in the camp. And
did he know that you were in the camp?
I don't think so. But
So
my reaction.
He was just sounding you out.
He was just sounding me out, yeah. And I said, okay, no, I don't want to write about it. And then he said, it's up to you. And so I came home and I talked to my mother, and she said, yes, I want to tell my story. And she's always wanted to tell the story. It's just like it was really difficult for me to actually tell it because there was not a lot of people listening to it. I think the approach was needed to be different. And so once that story was written, and it is a chapter in the book, it became a little bit easier. It's still, I don't go around, telling everybody I meet, what my background is. I just point them to the book.
But since you mentioned it, do you think you'd like to walk into a dinner party one of these days and be able to just say, this is my story? I mean, actually, why shouldn't you be able to say that? Would you like to be able to do that?
I think this year has been a sort of a crazy breakthrough year for that type of thing. Yes, I think we're much less fearful about it. With the story in the book, there's no reason for not saying it. I would probably start at saying, I wrote a book, a little bit easier than I was born in camp. Yeah. Still crazy, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and Joy, you know that I like to tell the story, but I would like to tell our viewers, presuming that they haven't heard it, that there's a reason that you are called Joy, right? And you mentioned all this business about the emotions and so on. I think it's really powerful that the reason you're called Joy is because your mother saw you as this one little spark of joy in this desolate camp, and when you were born, that's why she called you Joy. I mean, that's always moved me very much, and I think it sort of captures what this whole story is about. But again, just going back for a little bit longer to this business of telling your story and writing about it, are there parts of it that were easier to tell and parts that were more difficult? I mean, and again, I want you to reflect on that, not just for yourself, but for some of the others whose stories you've told. Did they find that some parts were easier and some parts were harder?
So for people I interviewed, right? So like Bobby Wong and Andy Shea, those folks, they were teenagers when they went to the camp, and they really suffered through whatever anybody would suffer, and more when you're a teenager. So it left a really very strong mark on them, which is really hard to shake. And I think they thought about it a lot. They talked about it a lot, and when they were ready to talk about it to me, their stories, for lack of a better word, flowed, because they just walked through how from the beginning to going to camp on the train and what they did. And so for them, sometimes when I went back and talked to them, they would come up with different, an additional story, right? Things that they couldn't always pack in because it is very emotional. Like when I look at them, when you're interviewing them, there's so many emotions boiling underneath. They also lived lives where they completely never talked about this to people at work. So there was this guy, so I think it was Stephen. He actually worked for like 30 years or so in this company, and then he left, and nobody knew anything about this. And then when he was done, he took a trip with us to Delhi in 2015, and so I think every time they talk about it, they lose a little bit of themselves, but it also heals a little bit more. So it's a little bit of that's a tension. From my personal experience with my mother, she just tells me, and we talk about it. We talk about it all the time. And I keep bringing this up, the whole birthday thing. For a lot of people, when you have a birthday, it's all happy and pleasant, and it's lovely and so on. And for many years, whenever it was my birthday, my mother would say, well, on this day at 10:30 at night, that's when I went. And she would just say it very sweetly. She wasn't like reminding me of anything. Your father had to go get the permit, and then I walked to the camp, and then at the gate she had to leave my father and go on. And so I would try to redirect her a lot because it wasn't always very pleasant, talking about this on my birthday. And then in the end, I just gave up, and I just, now we just talk about it all the time. And she's still like, I finished writing the book, and she'll tell me something, and it's like, couldn't make it into the book because, the stories sort of dribble in, and then sometimes outside the main narrative. And so I think when you're interviewing people, no matter how much you interview them, like it's my mother, right? There's still things that they forget, and it's not as important to the main narrative.
What really struck me, again, this about that I mean, I guess I never really thought of, was the effect that this whole issue would have had on Yiva Cheng. Again, for our viewers, Yiva is one of the people that Joy writes about. But Yiva is the daughter of Michael, whose story Joy also tells, but Michael was in the camp. Yiva is his daughter, who was born and grew up in the United States and is now, about 25 or 30 years old? So she has no first-hand experience of the camp at all. I don't even think she's visited, right?
Yeah, not at all.
Not at all. But her whole life, she talks about this, at least the way she tells the story, her whole life is colored in different ways by her father's experience. And the effect that it has on her life is a really, to me, it was startling, shocking, but also really telling in some ways. And again, it underlines the reason why we wrote this book. I mean, I think the story needs to be told not just for the people who were there, but the people who were affected afterwards. And could you reflect on that, Joy, about what it was like to talk to Yiva about it?
Yeah. So Yiva is a great character. A great chapter in the book because she is she's so real, she's so thoughtful, and she's just a very smart and brilliant young woman. So what she was able to express in that chapter was the fact that she was living under the shadow of her father's experience. And how that experience affected her father was she would see this darkness come over him when he recalled the camp. Oh, wow.
I'm sorry, but there's something going on outside. Yeah. Is it overwhelming, the sound? We're going to try and close the balcony door. We had no idea about this.
Maybe you can mute while I'm talking, and then.
Okay, maybe I should do that. One sec. How do I mute? One sec.
I wonder if I can mute you.
One sec. I'm mute.
Okay. Great job, Dilip. So Eva, so I was just talking about how she experienced her father's rage and discomfort, and what it did to her was it really made her question her privilege of having what she had in the United States, where and compared to what her father had to go through around the time he was a teenager. And it also really took her back and made her question what it means to be a citizen of a country. Do you really belong? If a country can do this, and you were born there, what does it mean? Where do you have security of any sort? Of being able to belong, and being sort of overridden just because of the way you look. So it doesn't matter whether you were born in this country, but because you look a certain way, you can be treated a certain way. And so it has really shaken her beliefs, and it was really heartbreaking to see that. It was eye-opening because this is a generation that has never even gone to India, never gone near Delhi, and a lot of the feelings she had was not kind of similar to what I had, because obviously I was so young I couldn't remember. So my experiences are the effects the experience has on the people that I love. My parents, my brothers, my circle of relatives. So the other thing I wanted to point out, Dilip, and this, is when we were actually writing the book, I had written this in the first person, right? And so we decided to keep it in the first person because all the other chapters about the people I interview are in the third person. But the first person narrative was so strong, and Eva's voice just came right through. And it's a really important consideration because she is one of the people who will carry this on, the remembrance. Good to unmute.
Yes, I will. Okay, am I unmuted now?
You're
okay, good. Yeah. So yeah, I'm so glad that you brought Eva's story to us. And I agree with you. She's the little bit I've met her and spoken to her. She's quite a remarkable woman. Joy, I want to also, just because you touched on it briefly, there is this parallel to the Japanese internment. So again, for our viewers, I just want to say that in 1942, I think it was, across the western United States, the Americans fighting this war against Japan at that time incarcerated about 100,000 Japanese Americans. There are two or three big differences between that internment and what happened to you. One is that there were 100,000 and there were only 3,000 Chinese Indians. But apart from that, the more important thing in my eyes is that in 1988, the Japanese Americans actually, after a lot of lobbying, actually got an apology from the U.S. government. So what do you think, Joy, about that? There's so many parallels to these questions of citizenship and belonging that you touched on a little bit earlier that are going on in India right now. In fact, going on in the United States too. But for us in particular in India, there are so many of those parallels that you can draw. Do you think that there's a place in that context for an apology, that it would do something not just for you, but for us who are not part of this, who are outside this whole experience? Would that apology do something for us as Indians? Can you reflect on that?
Yes. I think, but the first step is to even acknowledge that something wrong was done to innocent civilians. It's just inconceivable to me that a government would just incarcerate people who are their citizens, right? So it's just to me that not even being able to acknowledge that in the first place would be a barrier to getting that apology.
Yeah.
But as far as the apology is concerned, I think it would just show great leadership. I think it would heal a lot of the the people who are incarcerated. I think it would also heal a lot of Indian citizens, because that was the first time the Constitution was used to enact laws that would discriminate citizens based on their ethnic origin. I believe that's the case, right? And
Yeah.
so it opens a precedent for many other actions. Where does that end? What do you consider as a reason for mass incarceration of people? And India is a great democracy. Ideally, that would not happen. So I'm, I don't know how I feel being hopeful or not. Obviously, we want it, but being hopeful whether we'll have an apology or not is really out there. It's really hard to determine.
So are you saying that it's hard to be hopeful? Is that what you're saying?
I think so.
But
what do you? I mean, go ahead.
you know what honestly, I don't think it's going to happen. But I dearly want to be proven wrong in that. But I do agree with you. I think at least an acknowledgement, at least a wider awareness that this happened, and I think everybody who has read our book, who has heard our story, heard your story, and has and didn't know it before, and has heard it then, has gone back and reflected upon it, and realized that there was something cruel and wrong that was done in 1962, and it's at least it's time that we knew about it. And I think that's a good first step. As you know, there have been people who've listened to us who then out of the blue send you a note saying, at least from me and from the people who know me, I'd like to apologize to you. And that's a big step up from not knowing about it at all. So I'd like to see more of that happen.
Yeah, all those are very touching, and I encourage, if you, I don't know, you meet somebody who was interned, to say that would be very, very meaningful. But it still doesn't touch upon what, I always feel like the governments make civilians suffer in so many ways, and this is one way that was truly very tragic.
Yeah, well, but again, at least we'd like to think that in a democracy, the government is, us in the end, and if enough of us raise our voice, and that's the hope that we will create some little groundswell of opinion and emotion about this, and maybe something will come out of it. Okay, just one last question that I had again about the writing of this book. Did you have, because we collaborated on this, did you have any ideas before we started on it, Joy, about how this book should be structured between your voice and my voice? Because I had some thoughts about it too, but I wanted to ask you what you thought about it.
Right. So I have to say the way the book ended up is just absolutely the best solution we came up with, and I think we came upon it very organically. So in my head, I felt that you would write the beginnings and the ends, and bookend the chapters that were about the survivors, right? Sure. And so that's how I envisioned it. I thought I would do all the stories of the people who were in the camp, but in the end it wasn't like that. It was more interwoven, and it was done very skillfully, and we've been told that it was seamless and a very good read. What were your thoughts about it?
Well, I have to say, I like that word seamless. Every time I hear somebody telling us that, I'm very pleased and proud that it is like that. Yeah, well, I have to say that I too thought as a first cut that it was going to be bookended, that I would write some amount of history, then we'd have a whole lot of your 7 or 8 stories, whatever it is, and then some more history or politics or whatever it is that I would end up with. But when I started to try and put it together, it just didn't seem to fit really, and I think the reason for that is I felt that it would become a little too bulky. Bulky is not the word. Maybe heavy, or we're hitting people on the head. It's not easy to read those stories that you've told us, and one is hard enough to read, and to read 7 or 8 of them in a row, I thought would just get too. It would just be hard on a reader. So I thought it would make more sense to intersperse our writing, and somehow that's the way it just turned out. We have a little bit of the history of the issue and the border issue to start with. Then we have I think Andy Shea's story is the first, and then oh no, Bobby Wong actually.
Bobby, that's right.
Bobby, yeah. And then a little bit more and on and on. And the one thing that I felt was I really felt I'd like to have Yiva's and your stories more or less in the middle, because I felt like they were the climax of the book, but not a climax in the sense that it needed to be at the end. I felt like I'd like to take our readers up to a place, a sort of emotional high, which is where Yiva and at least you took me to that high, and then you come back down to whatever comes at the end. And I think that's the way it turned out, partly by design, but partly also I think it just happened. So I'm grateful for that. So.
Right. No, I think you did a really wonderful job of like seeing what it was, and then making it a little bit easier for the reader to not like clobber them. Yeah, you're right.
Clobber them is the word. Yeah, I don't want to do that. I mean, it's such an emotional story, really, if you think about it, and it should be emotional, but there should also be time for people to reflect on what this means. So, yeah. So shall we try and get some questions from our audience, if there are any? I mean, I hope there are, but
yeah, love that.
Gillian, are you in charge of that?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Thank you, Joy and Dilip, for this extremely interesting discussion. It's been quite an emotional eye-opener, and we've received a lot of questions from our viewers. So I'm just going to start with the first question from Masood Rahman. Is this storytelling a process of healing or a reminder of what can happen?
So I'll take a stab at it. So for the people who participated in the book, they were just delighted, and as much as delighted as you can be, of bringing up something so scarring. They were really happy that finally they had a platform that was bigger than just their own little community to share. I think that bad things that happen to certain people need to be in history. If it's a part of history, we need to know about it, even if it's tough and hard. Dredging up old things is part of being able to process it and come out on the other side, not just for the people, but also for the people who are around them. It's really important. So I would say there was healing within the community, and I think for other people, it's more about building awareness and having them see and understand other people's situation.
I do think it is a reminder of things that can happen and are happening now. This whole CAA and this whole questions of citizenship and a national citizens register and all these raise the same questions that Joy and her family and the other people who were in that camp faced in 1962 and onwards, and faced in the subsequent years, and that's why some of them chose to leave. So it is a reminder of what can happen if we're not careful.
Absolutely. In fact, I think we also have a question. One of our audience members has asked about the parallels with how do you. So there's a question from Siddhant. How do you compare the Deoliwallahs story with the movements against CAA and NRC? Since you just spoke about that.
Actually, I think it's a perfect parallel. What happened in 1962? We decided almost arbitrarily that certain people were not equal citizens, 3,000 of them, and we were going to incarcerate them for no reason except the fact that we were fighting a war with a country which was full of people who looked like Joy. what are we doing now? If we put CAA and NRC into action, into effect, in effect, there's going to be people who are, we will decide you're not a citizen based on something or the other. In this case, as we know, the particular religion that the person has. And what will happen to them? That we are already building detention camps in Assam and elsewhere, and we're going to be putting those people into those detention camps. What is this except a parallel to what happened in 1962? I mean, I cannot see it any other way. And the Chinese Indian people I've spoken to after this has happened say the same thing. They say this is what's happening is what happened to us. You know?
So there definitely is a parallel that we can draw.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes.
Thank you, Dilip. Our next question is from Himesh. He says, thank you for sharing this story. What important lessons do you think we as a society should take from this unfortunate episode in history?
Joy, you're the one for that.
Gosh, I think it really goes back to citizenship, and you're going to see more and more of this in the world. We're a really global world now. You're going to have Chinese Americans born here. You're going to have Indian, Americans born here. You're going to have people from Europe. You're going to have people from Africa. You're going to have people from everywhere. So how do you? I'm just talking about the United States, right? But a parallel to that is also India. You have a lot of different ethnicities out there. Some who have come from abroad. Some who have just been there for a long time. So I think understanding or like defining who is your citizen is truly important. Do you, as a country, celebrate and embrace diversity? Do you differentiate because of the differences? And I think as the world becomes a more global village, you're gonna have to decide what type of country you want to be and what type of citizenship will you support. So,
that's excellent. I mean, to call the world a global village, that's a very interesting point that you've made, Joy.
Thank you. I do have to commend Marshall McLuhan for saying that, but I think it works well.
Okay, it does. All right. Thank you, Joy. On to our next question from Meher Jani. Why is Joy Ma reticent about telling her story apart from the book? Isn't that one way of making people aware of this piece of history?
Good question. I think maybe the venues are important. Like when you go to a social gathering and you're meeting people for the first time, might not be a great thing, but probably when you become better friends, yes, you will be telling them. So yes, all my friends know now, but it wasn't an easy thing to overcome. Like when you're the only Chinese girl in your college, in your school or your college, it's gonna be difficult. It's not that I saw myself very differently, but there was a gap. So just to let you know, I did not tell my friends in Calcutta. I did not tell my friends in Delhi, and they honestly did not know until like this year, and they were horrified. But it's not easy, and it's still not the first thing that comes out of my mouth.
Right.
Because
and also, sorry. Also, because it's just not you're not just a descendant. You were actually born there, so that makes it all the more personal. I mean.
Yeah, and also, when you have like a bad experience, you don't want to always be. You want to move on also at some point. So when I was younger,
Right.
I didn't want anything to do with it because a lot of kids just don't want to deal with it, right? And it wasn't particularly, like I said, a very pleasant experience. To me, it's like the Chinese Indians who were incarcerated were betrayed by their own country, and so that's not a very pleasant thing.
Yeah, it's not. It's not. Absolutely. We have another question from Manisha Grewal. The Chinese have a rich tradition which once flourished in Calcutta and many parts of India, which has unfortunately dwindled. Is that because the population of Chinese have migrated, or that there is no interest in continuing with such traditions anymore?
That's a really good question. So I think it's a little bit of both. So there was a mass exodus of the Chinese Indians starting before the war in 1962. So a lot of them, the more professional people, went to the UK because I think because of the British. There must have been a path for them to get citizenship in the UK, and then a lot of people who remained uh, were business people, right? And so they had to fend for themselves and so on. Uh, the the internment was like a really clear definition of where you belong or not. And so a lot of people who came out of the camp, they moved on, and a lot of them migrated to Canada. So there's a very large population of Indian Chinese in in Canada and
Okay.
in Toronto, and with them went their families. And so the Chinese who have remained in India have chosen that to be their homes. They are very assimilated. They love where they live. They're regular citizens. So I was asked a question, which is what could we do? A journalist asked me, what could we do to make Indian citizens feel more comfortable? And my response was, you have to treat them like any other Indian citizen. You know, they're no different. So when you can understand that, um, the, that might be a way to make them feel comfortable.
Right. So equality should be the point in focus for sure.
But when this whole Corona thing erupted earlier this year, there were several incidents of people of Chinese descent in Calcutta, in fact, the badminton player Jwala Gupta has written about how she had these epithets thrown at her, or there was this guy on a train, a Chinese Indian guy on a train going to Calcutta, and a family next to him started saying, you get off, calling him Corona, and saying that you brought us this disease. So and he was speaking to them in Bengali, but that didn't seem to make any difference. So we all, I think that's what we have to reflect on. I mean, that's the lesson of this episode. To us who are not Chinese Indian, I mean, how do we treat people who look a little bit different from us?
Absolutely, Dilip. Our next question is from Sheila Gomes. What was the reaction of people who didn't know about their story until 2012, and how do you think they feel now?
So I can only, I have a couple of anecdotes, and I can just share that. So yes, I was in a party, and I told this person that I wrote this book, and she was just so shocked. So I just felt that during the party she just quieted down, and when she left, she said, "I'm so sorry, Joy, I had no idea." And I'm like, "You had nothing to do with it." So it's really you kind of have to be also kind, when you reveal this, because people do feel really bad about it, and I don't know.
And
I've
they
had
tend to
different
feel
reactions.
for it as well. I mean,
Yeah, they feel really guilty, or like one of my friends said, I have nothing to say to you. I'm so sorry. I'm so shocked. There are no words, and I felt, like I was throwing something at her. But it has to come out at some point. You're right. So it does come out.
right. Thank you, Joy. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. Shashikala B says that you grew up in Calcutta. Do you have any special memories of Tangra? I've seen it change over the years, and it looks sadly quiet these days except for the restaurants. So do you have any memories of growing up in Calcutta, and especially in Tangra?
Yes, I do. I didn't live in Tangra, but I would visit, and at that time, it wasn't a very. It was just developing, right? So you'd have, the hides all stretched out. You could smell the chemicals from a far away place. But it was a thriving community. It was right before there was a mass exodus of people. We didn't have any restaurants really at that time. The restaurants all came in like after, I think, in the 1990s and 2000s. So it would be going to people's homes and hanging out with your relatives. But there were a lot of people. And then what I do remember is on weekends, the people would get up on their motorcycles and go from Tangra to into Calcutta to watch movies and eat, kati kebabs at Nizam's and stuff like that. So it was very vibrant. But yeah, I haven't seen it recently, so I can imagine.
You haven't gone back anytime after that?
No, I haven't gone. I only go to Delhi these days when I go.
Okay. Right. Thank you. Thank you for that answer, Joy. We have one last question. I think we may have touched upon it during the conversation. Let me just get that out for you. This is from Usha Subramanian. Post Pearl Harbor, the Japanese Americans were placed in relocation centers. Prejudice, wartime hysteria, and politics contributory factors. Any parallels with the Indian response?
Oh,
Well, we did
wow.
touch upon it. Do you want to say something to it?
No, I just want to say there was no relocation packages. That there were no resources. That's all. It was like there was nothing to help us get back on our feet.
Yeah.
But sorry, what were you saying, Dilip?
No, I was just saying we did talk about the parallel. So I mean, there's a direct parallel because the Japanese Americans look Japanese and that's why they were incarcerated. The Chinese Indians look Chinese, that's why they were incarcerated. And for about 3-4 years in both cases. But the big difference is that the Japanese Americans eventually got this apology and as Joy said, a package that I think is $20,000 or $25,000 per person or per family. I can't remember. There's nothing like that in the works or that I know about in India. I'd like to see something like that in India.
Absolutely, I'm sure we all would. And like you said, there's absolutely no parallel at all between the two, and not even an apology received, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, that's all the questions we have time for right now. Joyma and Dilip D'Souza, thank you so much for being here with us. Would you like to say any last few words before we come to the end of our session?
I have something, but I'm going to let Joy finish.
Oh, I was just going to say thank you, Jillian, to the viewers out there. Pick up the book and read it and tell us what you think. Would love that.
Well, she took the words out of my mouth.
Oh, okay, sorry.
I wanted to say read the book. So thank you to all of you at LitLife for giving us this chance. But I really hope that whoever's watching does take that much at least. Go away, read the book, and certainly let us know what you think. And let others know. Spread the story. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for this absolutely heartwarming conversation. I, for one, am really looking forward to picking up the book. For our viewers, you can purchase the book from our bookstore partner, Tata Click. A big thank you to Tata, to our title sponsor, Tata, and our session sponsor, Blank Slate Knowledge Foundation, and to our wonderful audience for being here and sending in all these lovely questions. Coming up at 3 p.m. IST is Spinning Tales for the Web with Farooq Dhondi. And at 6 p.m. IST is Tata Literature Live 2020 Poet Laureate presentation to Javed Akhtar, followed by a reading of his poems, accompanied by Rakshanda Jalil, and a conversation with Festival Director Anil Dharkar. Stay tuned.